When someone has lived under the psychological influence of a narcissistic woman, the deepest wound is not emotional pain. It is the quiet destruction of self-trust. Over time, their inner compass is dismantled. They begin doubting their memory, their judgment, even their instincts. What they felt was wrong is reframed as oversensitivity. What they knew to be true is dismissed as imagination. Healing begins not when the relationship ends, but when this internal fracture is repaired. As recovery unfolds, something subtle but profound starts to happen. The person stops asking, "Was I wrong?" and starts asking, "Why did I stop trusting myself?" This shift marks the return of psychological authority. They begin recognizing that confusion was not a personal flaw, but a condition imposed through manipulation. Gaslighting loses its power the moment it is named. Once the mind sees clearly, it cannot unsee. In Jungian terms, this is the reintegration of the self. The individual reclaims the parts of their psyche that were pushed into doubt and silence. Intuition returns first, quietly. Then discernment follows. They no longer need constant reassurance because their inner dialogue stabilizes. Reality no longer feels negotiable. It feels solid again. What emerges is not arrogance, but grounded confidence. They listen more closely to themselves. They pause instead of reacting. They trust discomfort as information rather than weakness. This is why healed individuals are so difficult to manipulate. They are no longer seeking permission to believe their own experience. And this is the true transformation. When self-trust is restored, control collapses. No manipulator survives in the presence of someone who believes themselves. One of the most misunderstood aspects of healing after narcissistic abuse is the belief that freedom comes from understanding the narcissist. In truth, freedom comes from no longer being emotionally tied to them. Trauma bonding creates a powerful illusion that connection, even painful connection, is better than emotional separation. The nervous system becomes accustomed to chaos, reward, withdrawal, and intermittent validation. What feels like love is often a biochemical dependency disguised as attachment. As healing deepens, the individual begins to experience something unfamiliar, emotional quiet. At first, this silence can feel unsettling. There is no longer a rush of anxiety, no anticipation of approval, no constant monitoring of another person's moods. Slowly, the body recalibrates. The mind stops orbiting around someone else's reactions. The need to be chosen, understood, or finally valued starts to dissolve. From a Jungian perspective, this is the withdrawal of projected energy. During the trauma bond, parts of the self were unconsciously projected onto the narcissistic woman. Hope, meaning, even identity. Emotional independence emerges when those projections are retrieved. The individual realizes they were not chasing the narcissist, they were chasing themselves through her. This is why closure becomes irrelevant. Explanations lose their urgency. The healed person no longer waits for apologies or acknowledgments because their sense of worth is no longer outsourced. They can feel compassion without self-betrayal and distance without guilt. Their emotional center of gravity returns inward. When emotional independence replaces trauma bonding, relationships stop being survival strategies and start becoming choices. Connection becomes calm rather than consuming. Presence replaces obsession. And this is the turning point. When your peace no longer depends on someone else's behavior, you are no longer emotionally captive. You are free. One of the clearest signs that healing is real is not what a person says, but what they no longer tolerate. In the aftermath of narcissistic manipulation, boundaries often feel like something artificial. Rules learned from books, rehearsed in advance, enforced with anxiety. Early on, the healed individual may still explain too much, justify their distance, or feel guilty for protecting themselves. But over time, something far more powerful develops: instinct. As self-trust returns and emotional independence stabilizes, the nervous system learns to recognize danger before the mind has to debate it. Subtle signals, dismissive tones, shifting narratives, covert control are felt immediately. There is no inner argument, no need to collect evidence. The body knows. And when the body knows, boundaries no longer require confrontation. They require disengagement. From a Jungian lens, this is the strengthening of the ego in healthy alignment with the self. The person is no longer fragmented by fear of abandonment or the need to be seen as good. They act from inner coherence rather than external pressure. Saying no becomes simple because it is no longer a performance. It is an expression of identity. What surprises many people is how little drama is involved. Healed individuals do not announce their boundaries. They do not negotiate their limits. They simply remove access. They stop responding to manipulation, not with anger, but with absence. This quiet withdrawal is often misread as coldness, when in truth it is clarity. Boundaries at this stage are not walls built from resentment. They are filters built from wisdom. They allow connection where there is respect and distance where there is distortion. And this is the mark of true recovery, when you no longer need to defend your boundaries because your life itself enforces them. At some point in the healing process, a quiet realization emerges. The pain was not meaningless. What once felt like psychological devastation begins to reveal itself as a profound initiation. This does not romanticize suffering, nor does it justify what was done, but it reframes the experience in a way that restores power to the individual who endured it. Narcissistic abuse forces a person into deep psychological territory. They are confronted with manipulation, contradiction, and emotional deprivation, conditions that strip away illusions and expose unconscious patterns. In Jungian terms, this is an encounter with the shadow. The individual is compelled to face parts of themselves they may have avoided: the need to rescue, the fear of abandonment, the compulsion to earn love. Pain becomes the teacher precisely because it cannot be ignored. As healing progresses, this awareness transforms into strength. Emotional resilience develops not as numbness, but as discernment. The healed person can sit with discomfort without collapsing into self-doubt. They understand human behavior with greater depth, not through theory, but through lived experience. This makes them psychologically formidable, not hardened, but awake. What changes most is the relationship to suffering itself. Pain is no longer something to escape at all costs. It becomes information. It signals misalignment. It sharpens perception. The individual no longer confuses intensity with intimacy or chaos with passion. They recognize that peace is not boring. It is a sign of internal order. This is why healed individuals often carry a quiet authority. They have been to the depths and return. Ed with clarity, they are less impressed by charm and more attentive to consistency, less reactive, more anchored. And this is the alchemy of healing. When pain is integrated rather than denied, it becomes strength. And strength, when grounded in awareness, becomes freedom. One of the most lasting injuries caused by a narcissistic relationship is the slow erosion of identity. Over time, the individual learns to adapt, perform, and suppress parts of themselves in order to maintain connection. Their value becomes conditional, measured by how useful, agreeable, or compliant they are. Healing reverses this process, not by creating a new mask, but by removing all the old ones. As recovery deepens, the person begins asking different questions. Not, how do I keep this relationship? But who am I when I'm not managing someone else's emotions? This inquiry is unsettling at first, because authenticity feels risky after prolonged invalidation. Yet it is precisely this risk that leads to wholeness. The individual starts honoring preferences without apology, desires without justification, and limits without guilt. From a Jungian perspective, this is individuation in motion, the integration of fragmented aspects of the psyche into a coherent self. What was once disowned to maintain attachment is now reclaimed. Creativity returns, values sharpen. Purpose becomes internal rather than performative. The need for approval weakens because identity is no longer externally sourced. What changes is not just how they see themselves, but how they move through the world. They stop over-explaining. They stop proving. They stop seeking permission to exist as they are. Relationships become reflections, not foundations of self-worth. Connection is chosen, not clung to. This rebuilt identity carries a quiet solidity. It does not demand to be seen, yet it cannot be ignored. Others sense it, not as dominance, but as presence. The individual becomes grounded in who they are, rather than who they are needed to be. And this is the turning point. When you no longer shape yourself to be accepted, you finally become someone worth staying true to. The stage of healing is often the least dramatic, yet it is the most decisive. It is the moment when the narcissistic woman no longer occupies psychological space. There is no anger to resolve, no need to understand her motives, no curiosity about her life. The emotional charge dissolves. What remains is indifference, not as denial, but as integration. For a long time, the narcissist's power existed internally. Even in absence, they influenced thought, emotion, and behavior. Replaying conversations, imagining explanations, anticipating reactions. This is where control truly lived. Healing dismantles this inner theater. The individual recognizes that the narcissist's relevance was sustained not by presence, but by unresolved emotional investment. From a Jungian perspective, this marks the withdrawal of psychic energy from a once dominant ant complex. The figure that once loomed large in the psyche shrinks back into proportion. The narcissist becomes simply another human being, stripped of symbolic importance. When this happens, the compulsion to react disappears. Silence becomes natural, not strategic. What surprises many is that this indifference does not feel hollow. It feels spacious. Mental clarity returns. Energy that was once consumed by rumination is redirected toward creation, purpose, and connection. The healed individual no longer seeks justice through confrontation or validation through being remembered. Their life becomes the answer. This is why true healing is invisible to the narcissist. There is no announcement, no reaction, no emotional signal to feed on. The absence of response is not punishment, it is completion. And this is the quiet victory of recovery, when someone who once controlled your inner world no longer exists there at all. You don't move on, you move forward.